In Egypt, the past survives in many ways. An ancient implement called a shadoof is used for irrigation. A counterweighted pole makes it possible to raise water from the Nile, a process thousands of years old. Now, as then, irrigation is the mainstay of Egypt's agricultural economy, and the method used gives rural Egypt a sense of timelessness. Much farmland is tilled by hand with a simple hoe, just as it was in the time of the pharaohs. Earth and water are combined to make mud bricks, just as they have been for centuries. The bricks are molded by hand, then left to harden in the scorching desert sun. But of all the survivors from Egypt's ancient times, the pyramids stand alone as a testament to the genius and passion for life of a vanished civilization. To the ancient Egyptians, death marked not the end of life, but the beginning of a new life. And so they buried their dead kings, revered as gods, with provisions for the afterlife. When the king had been placed in his tomb, the last retainer withdrew, and the pyramid was sealed. The king embarked on a glorious new adventure, and his tomb, the pyramid, became a house of eternity. Archaeological studies of Egypt's pyramid sites helped to explain how pyramid building developed in the Old Kingdom. Egypt is the gift of the river, Herodotus wrote, and it still is. Every year from June to October, the Nile rose some 8 meters, swollen by rains in Central Africa. In the course of this annual inundation, the whole valley of Egypt was flooded and enriched. For graves to remain intact, it was necessary to bury the dead beyond the farthest reaches of the Nile's floodwaters. And this is where the earliest dead were buried, in shallow graves, their bodies naturally preserved in the hot, dry sand. The grave goods were simple. Really elaborate burials did not develop until after the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, around 3000 BC. The first royal capital of Egypt was Memphis, located a few kilometers to the south of modern Cairo. From this time onward, great tombs were built to house Egypt's dead royalty and the officials who served them. The high ground nearest Memphis lay about 3 kilometers to the west at a site known today as Saqqara. It was here that the evolution of the pyramid began. Excavations at Saqqara since 1935 have revealed a gradual development in tomb design. A series of recognizable stages links the early tombs of the First and Second dynasties to the remarkable step pyramid of the Third dynasty, a tomb with a fascinating complex of subsidiary buildings. Today, little is left of the parts of Saqqara that have not been restored, except occasional glimpses of mud brick walls, fragmentary facades of ruined buildings, the occasional carved stone, and elaborate niches in a wall. Excavation photographs and plans give a much clearer picture of these early mastabas, or bench-shaped tombs. The dead person was buried in the central chamber, surrounded by subsidiary rooms containing grave goods for the afterlife. None of the subsidiary chambers connected with the others. They were crammed with hundreds of pottery and stone vessels, provisions for eternity. Each burial pit was covered with a mound, all inside the superstructure of the tomb. In one mastaba at Saqqara, this mound was changed into a rectangular step structure. This was possibly the precursor of the great step pyramid itself. It had evolved from a simple shaft burial and mound. Then a brick structure, the bench-shaped mastaba, was built over it. Surrounding walls were added to enclose the whole tomb and its ancillary buildings. Then a great step structure was piled on top. First 4 steps, then 2 more, giving us the step pyramid itself as we see it today at Saqqara, the first of the pyramids. The original rectangular mastaba is clearly evident under the tiered superstructure that rose an imposing 65 meters. The step pyramid, with its massive enclosure walls, now partly reconstructed, represented great progress in architectural technique. It was the first structure in Egypt to be built entirely of stone. Nothing like it had appeared on Earth before. What gives it added fascination is the way in which the architect and masons were clearly feeling their way in an entirely new medium, translating the techniques of mud brick buildings into stone. A doorway with ornamental stone columns. Ceilings made of stone, with reproduction rafters carved to represent palm logs. Stone doors that cannot swing, and dummy stone bolts that cannot close. The step pyramid was a monument for King Djoser, who died around 2650 BC. Some of the statues were incomplete at his death. They were to show him performing his many ritual functions as king of both Upper and Lower Egypt, in settings that reproduced the graceful structures in Memphis. In this monumental complex at Saqqara, he would perform his royal functions for all eternity. Credit for conceiving this great work has always been given to Imhotep, Djoser's chief official. Egyptian historians describe him as the inventor of building with cut stone. In time, he came to be deified as a god of wisdom. Beneath the pyramid, there evolved a labyrinthine system of corridors and passages leading toward and around the burial area. Many of the passages end abruptly at the vertical grave shaft under the center of the pyramid. A stone box in the base of this shaft was built to house the body of King Djoser. The pyramid complex included a great dummy tomb, a duplicate of the principal burial area inside the pyramid. A long corridor led toward a grave shaft with a tiny empty burial chamber at the bottom. No one knows why this dummy tomb or cenotaph should have been built. Perhaps it was intended to be a second resting place for the king's spirit. It was beautifully appointed, like the step pyramid itself, with blue glazed tiles, perhaps to represent the colored hangings in the king's palace, and with false doors, with reliefs depicting the king engaged in the performance of religious ceremonies. Hard against the lower step of the superstructure of the pyramid, Imhotep built a small chamber. It contained a statue of Djoser and was the dead king's peephole on the living world. A life-size statue of Djoser was walled up inside the chamber, where he could receive offerings and observe his earthly realm. Some 50 kilometers south of Saqqara at Meidum, another stage in the evolution of the pyramid is apparent. Here stand the remains of a most un-pyramid-like structure, poking up from a great mound of rubble. It had a steep central core, 8 steps, and a casing that made it a true pyramid. Some believe its outer layers collapsed. The builders of the pyramids at Dahshur seem to have been more fortunate with their designs. The so-called bent pyramid got its curious shape and its name because the builders changed their minds halfway up. Perhaps they reckoned the angle of incline was too steep for safety, so they reduced it by 11 degrees. Its neighbor, the northern pyramid, was built entirely at the reduced angle and is therefore the first true geometric pyramid. But when pyramids are mentioned, most people think automatically of the 3 pyramids at Giza, near Cairo. The Giza pyramids are the most celebrated ancient monuments in the world. The Great Pyramid succeeds those at Dahshur and Meidum, 146 meters high when complete. It was to be the eternal house of King Cheops. The king was clearly established as a supreme being, surrounded by totally loyal and totally subservient nobles and officials. In death, they would surround him just as in life. The pyramids were cased in fine limestone, quarried at Tura, on the other side of the Nile from Giza, about 24 kilometers upstream. Today, Egyptian stonemasons mark their blocks in red, just as they did nearly 5,000 years ago. They still use the same tools and techniques their ancestors did, but today their tools are made of iron instead of copper or bronze. Most of the work was done during the annual inundation period of 3 months, when the peasants could be used for other kinds of labor. But how were the pyramids actually built? How were immense stone blocks like these moved into position? It is now generally believed that ramps were used for dragging the stones to higher levels on sledges and rollers. But it is quite certain that slave labor was not used. It was the Greek historian Herodotus who was responsible for this particular fallacy. Herodotus believed that 10 years were spent in constructing the road to the pyramid and 20 years in erecting the pyramid itself. Scholars now agree that Herodotus' time scale of 30 years in all was well within the range of possibility, and the model at the Boston Science Museum suggests how it might have been done. Today, as in the past, there are people who will climb the Giza pyramids for money, and who do so with as much ease as we would climb a staircase. When the pyramids were first built, such an ascent would not have been possible, for the smooth outer casing that made the structure a true pyramid would have prevented even the smallest foothold. This smooth outer casing has been destroyed in time, revealing the inner casing of coarse limestone that we see today. A visit to the interior of the Great Pyramid is facilitated by modern staircases, but should be omitted by nervous or delicate persons, especially those predisposed to apoplectic or fainting fits. Baedeker's Egypt in the 1929 edition reflected unerringly the gentility of that era of traveling. Cheops had apparently been buried not underground, as had been originally intended, but in a chamber high in the heart of the pyramid. It is reached by a long incline of the Grand Gallery, a magnificent corbel-roofed corridor 47 meters long, a marvel of skillful masonry through the core of this vast pile of 2,300,000 blocks of stone. At the far end of the ascending gallery, originally blocked off and sealed by blocks of stone, lies the king's chamber, built entirely of granite and finished to a wonderfully smooth surface, but plain and undecorated. All it contains is a monolithic granite sarcophagus, its lid missing. The pyramid had been broken into in antiquity and the burial chamber plundered. All royal sepulchres from the Old Kingdom period have been robbed. Next to the Great Pyramid is the slightly smaller pyramid built for Cheop's successor, Khephren. Its sides are slightly steeper, and right at the top, some of the original gleaming outer casing of Tura limestone has survived. Nearby crouches the Sphinx, its face said to be a portrait of Khephren. Between its paws it holds a stela, commemorating a dream in which it spoke to a later prince of Egypt, many centuries after the pyramids were built. See me, observe me, my son. My condition is that of one who is in dire necessity. My whole body is in ruins. The sands of the desert on which I have lain have crept up on me, but I have waited so that you may do what is in my heart. Come near. See, I am with you. I am your guide. Khepren's Valley Temple, which stands nearby the Sphinx, is the best preserved of all Old Kingdom Valley temples. Every pyramid had a valley temple. It is to this place that the king's body was brought by boat for the final stages of the funeral rites. Columns, doors, beams, and floors were all made of massive granite slabs. Light openings, cut where the walls met the ceiling, cast a diffused reflected glow on the statues of the king, seated in regal splendor with his deity, the falcon Horus, enclosing his head with protective wings. The final stages of the funeral rites took place in the Valley Temple. The dog-headed god, Anubis, superintends the ritual of mummification in a later tomb. Mummification was necessary to preserve the king's body so that it could serve as an eternal dwelling place for his soul. Mummification involved a long process of dehydration with natron, a natural form of salt. The body was then washed, purified, and anointed with sweet-smelling unguents and herbs. In later times, it was wrapped in hundreds of meters of bandages to protect it and to restore the shape and substance lost in dehydration. From the Valley Temple, the king's body was taken along the causeway to a second temple, the mortuary temple that lay close to the pyramid itself. The causeway of King Unas from a later period is the best preserved of all the causeways. It gives us a good impression of what it must have been like when the king passed along on his last earthly journey, drawn on a sledge and followed by the servants and bearers, carrying all he would need for continued existence. Safely sealed in his pyramid, the king passed into the company of the gods. The third pyramid of the Giza group seems tiny in comparison with its huge neighbors. It was built for a king called Mycerinus, a successor to Khephren. But though it is small, it is well built. The casing on its lower courses was of granite. Mycerinus left a legacy of fine sculpture, including some beautifully carved slate triads showing the king walking between two goddesses. Giza represents the climax of pyramid building in the Old Kingdom. From then on, a period of decline set in. Now it was the nobles who were growing in power. The king had lost his supremacy. In the declining economy of the Old Kingdom, perhaps overtaxed by mammoth building projects, such as the Giza pyramids, there were simply not enough resources available to build big and build well. The royal pyramids became smaller and were less well constructed. Most are now shapeless mounds of rubble, mere shadows of the magnificent monuments that dominate the plain at Giza. It is to these royal tombs that our thoughts irresistibly return when the works of ancient man are considered.